Millions in Syria and Iraq are facing water shortages as the region's longest river, the Euphrates.
Millions of Syrians and Iraqis are facing water shortages as the Euphrates, the region's longest river, dries up. The water level in Venice, Italy is so low that rowing a boat is impossible. In France, it didn't rain for more than 30 days straight. In the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent transforms into a desert, leaving people who witness it in amazement. Surely this news has been appearing recently. Despite all of the drought-related news, the drying up of the Euphrates River has inspired apocalypse predictions. Because according to the Bible's revelation, the drying up of the Euphrates River is one of the indicators of the end of the world, along with the Zionist Jews. Is the prediction of the end times coming? What should we do? In this episode, we will explain in more detail. Smash that thumbs up button for me, leave me a comment below, and share this video with your friends. And let's get started. Although the Euphrates River begins in Turkey, it flows through Syria and Iraq before draining into the Persian Gulf. The river joins with the Tigris. The basin's length is around 1,700 miles, with an average area of 190,000 square miles. This is the longest river in Western Asia. Water levels are often higher in April and May due to increased rainfall and melting runoff. Along the river, you can still see the original vegetation. For example, the Euphrates River flows through a xeric forest in the southeast Turkish mountains. Other plants and trees found along the river's coast include oaks, pistachio trees, and rose plum trees. Cereal crops such as wheat, rye, and oats are widely grown in dry areas. The Euphrates River is not only breathtakingly beautiful and has incredible views, but it also holds a lot of historical value. Several ancient cities, including Zipar, Nippur, Shuruppak, Mari, and Urkuk, stood alongside the river. Wealth was water. It gave the people living along the river with fertile agricultural land. Cuneiform texts found at Shuruppak and priests organic Nippur were the first to mention the Euphrates River. It dates from the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. Buranuna, a prehistoric Sumerian term, was used to describe it. The river's name is spelled similarly to Saipar, a historical Iraqi city. The city and the river most likely shared an essential and heavenly relationship. The Euphrates River is home to a diverse range of wildlife, including snakes, small and large mammals, and fish. There are numerous plant and animal species, as well as different animal types. For example, the most common snakes in the Euphrates River are the Persian sand viper, Levantine viper, desert black viper, beaked sea snake, and yellow sea snake. Willow trees and wild grass can be found along the riverbed. In addition to greenery, you can see hedgehogs, wild pigs, wolves, river otters, and shrews. They frequently drink from the Euphrates River's waters. The Euphrates River is also home to and used by various bird species. When discussing world history, the rivers Euphrates and Tigris are commonly mentioned together. After all, they contributed significantly to the development of Fertile Crescent towns such as Sumer and the Mesopotamian region. This region was home to early human civilizations. After humans settled there and began farming and irrigation along the Euphrates River, the first settlements emerged, and people developed written language, astronomy, trading routes, and other skills. It is nearly impossible to exaggerate how important the Euphrates River is to this region. The Euphrates River remains important to the people who live along its banks today. The river has been used to generate hydroelectric power, as well as for irrigation and drinking water. Agreements between Turkey, Syria, and Iraq are still being worked out, as each country's population relies on water to exist. Because the river runs through 3 of them, the manger, gar, spiny eels, common carp, and yellowfin barbel, are just a few of the many different species that may be found at the Euphrates River's bottom. The Euphrates River's largest fish is the manger. They are some of the world's longest freshwater fish. In fact, they can grow to be over 7 feet long and weigh more than 300 pounds. They are quite popular among recreational anglers. Even if they don't live in the Euphrates River, many other animals do. Several snake species fit into this category, including the Levantine viper, the desert horned viper, and the Persian horned viper. The Euphrates River's water level is dropping, making these snakes more of a problem. The heat and dryness in the area are driving the snakes away, bringing them in more human contact than usual. This deadly snake invasion has harmed both humans and wildlife. Throughout antiquity, numerous civilizations existed along the Euphrates River's banks. The Mesopotamian Empire was one of the region's most famous civilizations. Ancient Mesopotamia was known as the Fertile Crescent because it was located between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. The current name for that region of the world is Iraq. The Euphrates basin still has ancient vegetation, despite the fact that the vast bulk of its landscapes have been dramatically transformed by human activity over millennia. Given the current state of the river, it may be difficult to believe that it was once a magnificent example of water management in Babylon. Cyrus the Great's army marched through Babylon and arrived at the canals between the Tigris and the Euphrates, which were built to drain water from the Euphrates that would otherwise flood the surrounding region when the snow on the Armenian mountains melted. The basin between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers was spanned by numerous enormous canals as wide as rivers. Every section of the country received enough water. Canals were also used to convey crops. The river was also used by religious militants to spread Islam over the Middle East. In the year 656, Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib, transferred his caliphate from Medina to Kufa, located on the Euphrates River south of Babylon. Kufa's rich wheat, date palm, rice, and other crop fields spanned over miles along both banks. For millennia, the Euphrates has served as the focal point of many Iraqi cities' identities, and it still does. Consider Fallujah, which benefited from its riverfront location and was assaulted by a number of nations in the 3rd century AD, including the Persians and Romans en route to the Mediterranean. Arab caravans stopped in Fallujah to water their camels in the river. However, analysts foresee bad news for the river. After all, the water levels in some places of the Euphrates River have been falling for some time, making it easier to determine what lives at its bottom. Why has the Euphrates River dried up for so long? Dams, droughts, water policies, and overuse are just a few of the numerous contributing factors. Many river-dependent families in Iraq face a serious water deficit. Low rainfall is the primary reason of the Euphrates River's drying up. Iraq is currently undergoing its most severe drought in history. According to Berkeley Earth, a California-based non-profit organization specialized in climate studies, Iraq's annual temperatures are rising at roughly twice the rate of the global average. Droughts are prevalent in Iraq and the surrounding region. In addition to climate change and rising temperatures, Iraq has warmed by an astounding 2.5 degrees Celsius since the late 1800s, compared to the global average of 1.3 degrees Celsius. This issue has existed for years. The drying up of the river affects more than 7 million people. Over 800 families have evacuated towns near the Euphrates River as a result of crop failure caused by low rainfall, high temperatures, and river dryness. Unfortunately, another biblical river, the Tigris, is also drying out and losing water. The human-caused component of the Euphrates' problems, on the other hand, begin over 1,000 kilometers upstream, near the river's catchment area in eastern Turkey below the Taurus Mountains. For many years, the Turkish government has constructed dams to develop agricultural land and generate electricity. The Kaban Dam on the upper Euphrates was built in 1974, and the Ataturk Dam was completed in 1990. A $32 billion project to develop 22 dams and 19 hydroelectric plants on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers will eventually meet approximately 25% of Turkey's electricity demands. Syria built numerous other dams on the Euphrates and its tributaries, including the Tabqa Dam in the 1970s, upstream of Raqqa. Before the civil war halted operations, water entering Iraq had decreased by nearly 2/3 since the Turkish and Syrian dams were built in the 1970s. For decades, Iraqis and their neighbors have been at odds over water resources. When Turkey and Syria dammed the Euphrates River into a series of reservoirs, effectively drying off the river's downstream stream in Iraq, the situation came dangerously close to war. In response, the Iraqi government constructed a network of canals that linked the Euphrates River to Lake al-Sarthar, northwest of Baghdad. With the lack of available fresh water, people turned to drinking waters that have later been found to be contaminated. Since people are drinking contaminated water, disease in the Middle East has increased over the past several years. Diarrhea, chickenpox, measles, typhoid fever, and cholera are currently spreading across Iraq because of the water crisis, according to the British Medical Journal. The BMJ also estimates that 3 out of every 5 children do not have access to safely managed water services. Is the Euphrates River drying up a sign of the end times? The Euphrates River, long part of the area known as the Fertile Crescent, is a significant landmark in Scripture and a valuable resource in the Middle East as it runs through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Over the past few years, the water level of the Euphrates River has dropped dramatically. The drying up of the Euphrates River has revealed several ancient ruins and a cave. Some people are quick to point to the drying riverbed as a fulfillment of the Bible's end times prophecies. Two passages in the Bible predict the drying up of the Euphrates River. The first prediction is part of a lengthy oracle against Babylon. God pronounces judgment against Babylon's officials and wise men, and against its false prophets, warriors, horses, and chariots, and treasures. Then God says, "A drought on her waters, and they will dry up. For it is a land of idols that will go mad with terror." Jeremiah 50:38. The waters of Babylon are the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. Both rivers are drying up now. Are we witnessing the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy? The second prediction of the Euphrates River drying up comes as part of the 7 bowl judgments in Revelation. The judgments of the 7-year tribulation start with the 7 seals, Revelation 6:1-17, 8:1-5, continue with the 7 trumpets, Revelation 8:6, 9:21, 11:15, 19, and end with the 7 bowls, Revelation 16:1-21. The bowl judgments come at the end of the tribulation, and they are so destructive that if they continued, all human life would perish. Mark 13:19-20. The 6th bowl judgment, the penultimate judgment of the tribulation, is the drying up of the Euphrates River. Revelation 16:12 says, "The 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east." This prophecy not only identifies the judgment, but also gives the reason for it. So a great army from the east can cross the Euphrates unimpeded. Next, the kings of the earth gather to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Revelation 16:16. At that point, Jesus returns, and the battle fought at Armageddon will result in all God's enemies being destroyed. Revelation 16:17, 20, 19, 11, 21. A key event leading up to Armageddon is the drying up of the Euphrates. Are we witnessing the setup for the fulfillment of a major end times prophecy? Concerning Jeremiah's prophecy that the Euphrates River will dry up, there are several possibilities. 1. The prophecy was fulfilled by military action in 539 BC, when the Persian king Cyrus conquered Babylon. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus diverted the water of the Euphrates enough to allow his army to enter through the channels under the city walls. History 1.189-191. 2. The prophecy was fulfilled by drought at some unknown time. 3. The prophecy is being fulfilled now, as the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are diminishing. 4. The prophecy will be fulfilled during the Great Tribulation, corresponding to the 6th bowl judgment of Revelation 16. 5. The prophecy has a double fulfillment, once in the past and again in the future, during the end times. Concerning John's vision that the Euphrates will dry up, that will have a future fulfillment. The current drying up of the Euphrates is not related to the prophecy of Revelation 16:12 for these reasons. 1. The 6th bowl judgment comes near the end of the tribulation. Before the 6th bowl, the Antichrist will rise to power, the 2 miracle-working prophets will preach, and many terrible judgments will occur. We are not in the tribulation now. 2. According to Revelation 18:17-19, Babylon in the end times will do much commerce by ship, suggesting that the rivers in that area are freely flowing during the tribulation, at least for a while. 3. The supernatural drying up of the Euphrates. In Revelation 16:12 allows an army from the Orient to march westward. No such army is threatening Israel now. When it comes time for the Battle of Armageddon, the Euphrates River will indeed dry up. The current water level of the Euphrates, the revealing of ruins and caves, etc., has nothing to do with Revelation 16:12. That simply hasn't happened yet. Jesus will come. If an infallible spokesman for Jesus Christ does not know when the Lord is going to return, as Jesus said would be the case, Matt. 24:36. What would that spokesman mean by saying it will be soon, Reverend 22:20, or at hand, 1 Pete 4:7, or at the door, James 5:9? I think it misses the point of Matthew 24:36 to say Jesus didn't know the day and hour, but that he did know the month or the year. The point of Jesus' ignorance of the time is to remove the possibility of calculating how long we dare be indifferent to his coming. Not knowing the day or the hour is a graphic way of saying that neither he nor we can predict the time. So the question remains, what would it mean then for an infallible spokesman, an apostle of the Lord Jesus, who cannot predict the time, to say that Jesus is coming soon, or that Jesus is at the door, or that Jesus is at hand, or that Jesus will come after a little while? What do the New Testament writers mean by their predictions of Jesus' nearness? In what sense do they mean he is near? In answer to those questions, I'm going to offer 3 phrases that I believe are rooted in biblical texts, and then give a brief explanation of each: potentially near, holistically near, and divinely near. Potentially near. First, the apostles mean Jesus is potentially near. That is, he is near in the sense that any presumption of his delay on our part would be folly. It is as if the apostles should say, "You know that we cannot predict the time of the Lord's coming, because the Lord himself did not know the time." Matthew 24:36. And he told us, "It is not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority." Acts 1:7. Therefore you know that when we say, "Soon," we are not doing what we cannot do. We are not predicting what we cannot predict. Rather, we are telling you that it is potentially soon, meaning that the replacement of hope for this soonness with presumption of delay will unfit you for his coming and lead to destruction. By presumption, I mean the unwarranted assumption that his coming is so distant that I am not in danger of his coming while I neglect my vigilance to walk uprightly. This presumption fails to reckon with the fact that lack of vigilance now may lead to utter obliviousness for the rest of your life, so that the so-called distant coming finds you utterly unprepared. I draw this meaning of soon from Jesus' illustration of the second coming in Matthew 24:45-51. Then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set it over his household, to give them their food at the proper time. Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, "My master is delayed," and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The warning is this: never presume upon the master's delay. That is, never presume that neglecting spiritual wakefulness will not be met with the surprise of his appearing. Always hope for his soon arrival and act in the light of it. Saying that Jesus' coming is near when you do not know when he is coming means that he is potentially near, and all presumption otherwise is dangerous. Holistically near. Second, the apostles mean Jesus is holistically near. That is, as part of a whole unified vision of the end time. He is near because, considered as a whole, the end, the last days, are already present. Taken as a whole, the end has begun. When we say that Jesus and the apostles did not know when the second coming would take place, we are saying that the future God granted them to see was like successive mountain ranges that appear as a single range. This telescoped range of mountain ridges, appearing as one, is what I mean by a whole unified vision of the end time. My family has spent time at a home in Tennessee that has a front porch facing northeast. On a crystal clear evening, we can see at least 7 distinct mountain ranges from that porch. But on a hazy evening, they look like one mountain range. I have used George Ladd's phrase prophetic perspective to describe this way of seeing the future. It sees the distant reality and the nearer reality as one. I'm using the phrase holistically near rather than prophetically near, because I think it might trigger in our memory more clearly the idea of the second coming being part of a telescoped or foreshortened vision of a history of events seen as a whole. The last days began with the first coming of the Messiah. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but was made manifest in the last times for the sake of you who through him are believers in God. 1 Pet 1:20-21. In these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. Heb 1:2. He has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Hebrew 9:26, cf. 1 Cor 10:11. This implies that the vision of the entire period between the incarnation and the second coming is one great mountain range with many hills and peaks that were indistinct to the apostles. They were granted to know a good many details, but very little about the overall time frame. They saw the end largely as one reality. and they speak of it holistically as near because as a whole it is near. That near whole includes the parousia, the coming of Jesus. Therefore it too is near as part of the whole that has already begun. Divinely near. Third, the apostles mean Jesus is divinely near. That is, from the divine perspective, the time between Jesus' first and second coming is very short. The apostle Peter introduces this meaning of near in his response to scoffers who already in his day mocked the fact that so much time had passed without the Lord's return. He says, "Know this first of all, that scoffers will come in the last days with scoffing, following their own sinful desires. They will say, 'Where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation.'" 2 Pet 3:3-4. After reminding the scoffers that history is not as static as they think, in view of creation and flood and final judgment, 2 Pet 3:5-7, he then introduces the foundation of what I'm calling divinely near. "But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance." 2 Pet 3:8-9. Verse 9 is addressed to our attitude and our vocabulary. Don't call God's purposeful delay slowness. Call it patience. Don't scoff at God's timing as if his promise of coming soon were a myth. 2 Pet 1:16. Instead, give thanks that his promise of mercy and patience is being perfectly worked out. To support his admonition about our attitude and vocabulary, Peter introduces the concept of divinely near. With the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. To get the full force of the point, a scoffer might calculate, supposing that Peter wrote this letter 30 years after the ascension of Jesus to heaven, those 30 years would be 3% of 1,000 years. Since 1,000 years is as 1 day, that would mean that 0.72 hours, 0.03x 24 hours in a day, has passed since Jesus departed. 45 minutes is not a long delay, or from the standpoint of the 21st century, 2 days is not a long delay. In essence, Peter is introducing the mystery of God's relation to time. The Bible is not a primer on Einstein's relativity theory. It does not delve into the scientific relationship between space and time. However, Paul says provocatively that God decreed a hidden wisdom before the ages for our glory. 1 Cor 2:7, cf. 2 Tim 1:9, Titus 1:2. In other words, in some sense, God existed before the ages, that is, before time. Peter is suggesting to us that this mysterious relationship between God and time should make us slow to scoff at the timing of his prophecies. If Jesus and the apostles say the coming of Christ is near or at hand or at the gates or soon, when they confessedly do not know when he is coming, we should reckon with the fact that the divine perspective is part of what gives meaning to their words. Jesus is divinely near. His appearing is near in at least 3 senses. I conclude, therefore, that if we take into account the pointers Jesus and the apostles give us, we will not fault them for speaking of the Lord's coming as near or soon or at hand. We will take into account the agreed-upon premise that none of them knew when Jesus would return. With that pointer in view, we will take heed to Jesus' warning against every presumption of delay as a dangerous attitude, Matt 24:48, par Luke 12:45, and conclude that the second coming is potentially near. We will take heed to the prophetic perspective of the Old and New Testaments that sees the last days, including Christ's first and second coming. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.